Hi everyone, and welcome back to our silent journey. If you're new here, my name is Felicia, and every week we sit down together to talk about the stories that often stay hidden, the struggles people carry behind closed doors, the moments that shape us, and the journeys we don't always feel comfortable talking about. Today's episode is one that has been close to my heart, not because I personally experienced postpartum depression, but because someone I love did. As I began learning more about postpartum depression, I realized something that honestly broke my heart. I realized that so many mothers are suffering in silence, sometimes while the people who love them the most have absolutely no idea. As moms, there's so much focus on the baby. Is the baby sleeping? Is the baby eating? How much does the baby weigh? Does the baby have enough diapers? But somewhere in all of those questions, sometimes we forget to ask, how's mom? Today's conversation isn't meant to diagnose anyone. It isn't meant to replace professional help. It's simply one woman's story. A story that I believe deserves to be heard. Because I know someone listening may recognize pieces of themselves in it. Before we begin, I do want to give a gentle trigger warning. Today's episode discusses postpartum depression, including feelings of helplessness, intrusive thoughts, and anxiety, and emotional struggles after childbirth. If those topics feel too heavy today, please take care of yourself first. It's okay to pause this episode and come back another time. We'll be here whenever you're ready. Today, I'm joined by my sister-in-law, Destiny, someone I love dearly, and someone who has graciously agreed to share one of the hardest seasons of her life. Not because she has to, but because she hopes that by sharing her story, another mom might feel a little less alone. Before we jump into everything, I just want to say something directly to you. There are no expectations today. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. And if I ask something that feels too personal, or if we get to a place that feels too overwhelming, I just want you to tell me. And we'll skip it, we'll pause, we'll take a break, whatever you need.
Sounds good.
Your well-being is so much more important than this episode. I'm simply grateful you're willing to be here. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you ready?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I'd love to start before becoming a mom. Before postpartum depression, before everything changed. What did you think postpartum depression was before you had children?
I knew what postpartum depression was, or I knew about it because they talk about it. Like when you read all the books or things like that, it's brought up, but I don't think that I really understood it. Right. So I think people talk about it, but it may just take being in it to really understand kind of the feelings.
Did you ever think that could never happen to me?
I think in a way, I had never really experienced depression in my life, but I've known people who've had depression or have suffered with it, and I could always sympathize with them, but I just never understood it, and so I didn't realize until after the fact that it can happen to anyone.
Right.
And so to answer your question, I wasn't top of my mind while I was pregnant, but I think it's definitely something now that I recognize that probably should have been a thought, to kind of get ahead of or take more care of yourself in advance.
When you were pregnant, what did you picture motherhood looking like? What expectations did you have for yourself?
Um, I think you always want to be like the picture perfect parent, you know, and so you get everybody's thoughts, especially while you're pregnant or like early, and so there's all these things like, oh, are you gonna be breastfeeding, or you know, are you gonna do diapers or cloth diapers or co-sleep or not, and so beforehand it was more of like stress of how do I make the right decision. So I going into it, I was always anxious because I just didn't want to make the wrong one, you know? So.
Looking back now, are there any warning signs that you recognize that you didn't realize were warning signs at the time?
I'm not really sure. I think that I had a lot of stressors in my life during pregnancy. Like, we had just gotten married and we had just bought a house, and like you guys were going through your wedding, and so you know all those other things that were stressors that we didn't like think about how that could actually be impacting, you know, your hormones or the baby inside. So looking back, I'd probably, you know, just take a second to recognize those versus pushing through everyday life like you normally would without a pregnancy.
If you could somehow sit beside the version of yourself that was pregnant, what would you tell her?
To just be like give yourself grace. I've always kind of feel like I've lived fast paced, you know, like I did school and marriage and bought a house and baby all very fast, you know. It was never, and not that I regret anything, but it's just I've always lived a more fast paced life, I feel. And so sometimes when you make mistakes or you go through situations like this, you feel like something's wrong with you, you know. So definitely to give myself grace and to just live in the moment instead of trying to, you know, move forward or what's the next path or things like that.
I think something that's easy to forget is that postpartum depression doesn't usually begin with someone waking up one morning and knowing exactly what's happening. Sometimes it's so gradual that you don't even realize you've been slipping. When did you first notice that something didn't feel right?
If I think about it now, it was probably as soon as I got home from the hospital. I remember like I was breastfeeding my son, but he had a tongue tie, and so he wasn't latching very well. And it was like the first night we got home from the hospital, and I just felt like I was failing immediately, you know.
Yeah.
But in the moment, I didn't realize. I think the moment I realized that something actually was wrong was I've always been, I'm not really a homebody. Like I like to go out and we have a big family, so we're always at events. But I did not want to leave my house. Like that was kind of my safe space. And my husband, or Holly, had kind of recognized that before I did. Like I didn't want to leave. And so he had been like, let's go to the store, you know, like let's get out of the house, it's time to do something outside. And we had barely walked to the store. I think we were in like the produce aisle, so it's like the first thing that you get into the store. And I just started crying, and I could not even tell you why. And he was like, what is wrong? And I couldn't do anything about it. I just felt so heavy. So for me, that was like, okay, this is not me, you know. But looking back, it was probably started before that.
Right. Was there a specific moment where you remember thinking, I don't feel like myself anymore?
Yeah, it was probably the grocery store moment, and then I think that was the start of it. But over time, like I started to realize that things were harder. Like I had 12 weeks of maternity leave, but I went back to work early, and just work was hard for me, and just everyday life was hard. And so over time, I started to realize. But yeah, the grocery store moment is probably it for me.
Did postpartum depression come on suddenly, or did it slowly build over time?
I don't, probably over time. Like I think it was there from birth, but got harder, you know? So built over time, definitely.
What emotions surprised you the most, and were there emotions that made you stop and think, where is this coming from?
Yeah, definitely. Sadness was really hard. Like like I said, I never really experienced depression, and so I've had sad moments in my life, but nothing that ever felt so heavy. And I had a lot of anger for some reason. Like I just felt like my husband couldn't do right, or the dog couldn't do right, and so those were things that I didn't realize came with all the emotions.
Right. Were there feelings you carried that you were almost afraid to admit out
loud? Definitely. I mean, I think because I was in like the state that I was, I didn't connect with my son immediately. Like I loved him as soon as I got home, or as soon as I had him. I had all those feelings, but it was. Some people talk about like, the moment you have him, everything changes. And I think the moment I had him, I realized like, this is someone I have to keep alive, and so that connection just took me a little bit longer. I think coming out of depression, or I really built a connection with him, but in the moment I was more in like a, I don't know, like nothingness state, that I didn't have it in me to build that connection.
So this next question I think might be one of the most important, because sometimes the loudest battles are the ones no one else can hear. What thoughts were happening inside your mind that no one around you knew about?
Just a lot of, I don't know, everything, I was really, really sad. Like I couldn't control if I would cry or not. Some people call them like the nighttime scaries, where like the night would come around and there's nobody else around you. And so you're kind of just like in this darkness alone. So feelings of sad, and then I felt guilty about everything. I didn't feel like I was doing motherhood correctly, like my son being tongue-tied and not latching, or I wasn't pumping enough. And so all these things that like as a normal, like they're normal to have as a new mom, but you just felt like a constant failure. Like I don't know, I just couldn't, I felt like I was doing it all wrong,
right. Thank you for trusting me with that. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about postpartum depression is that people assume they would notice. That if someone was struggling, it would be obvious. But from everything I've learned, that's not always true. Sometimes someone can look completely okay while quietly fighting the hardest battle of their life. Can you walk us through what an average day looked like during your hardest weeks? From the moment you woke up until you went to bed, what was happening both around you and inside your mind?
I would wake up and just kind of get myself through the day. Early on, when like my son was just born, I wasn't like eating, or I lived in my room. I don't even know that like I really left, and so I think my husband had noticed, and he had did everything that he could to kind of help. So I think it helped me create my safe space. So like he had got me a fridge for the bedroom, so that way I could breastfeed and stay in there, and things like that. But waking up, my whole focus was on my son, and I just couldn't give myself to do anything else, like eat or shower or anything. But I did have a lot of help from my mother-in-law, or our mother-in-law, and at the time I wasn't in a place to take it, but like I wasn't eating, and in the mornings she would make me a shake that had like protein and stuff in it, because she noticed that I wasn't eating, and she was kind of like, if you're gonna breastfeed,
Yeah.
Or like I was so scared. I'm naturally an anxious person, and so I had my anxiety was really heightened. I think honestly my anxiety has stayed in a heightened state since then, but she would like offer to hold my son while I napped or things like that, and I just couldn't let her.
Yeah.
And so like looking back, I would probably take that support, but day to day I just couldn't, I wasn't in a place to
receive that. Yeah. What did everyone else see compared to what you were actually experiencing?
I don't know. I think maybe that's more of a question for you, like if you saw anything different. But for me, I think I tried to be as normal as possible. I think maybe I was less talkative. I can see looking back, but I tried to like still show up.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I would say you were kind of like when we were at your house, you were always like in your bedroom, which was not really normal.
Yeah. I have heard someone like Sarah, she has mentioned that like I just looked drained when she had came. So I probably did, but I didn't recognize at the time that other people had seen that.
Did you ever feel guilty because motherhood didn't look the way you thought it was supposed to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was like a day-to-day battle. Even now, sometimes, and that's probably just normal motherhood that you feel guilty, but I swear every decision I made was like, is it the wrong one? Yeah. So, definitely.
Did you ever find yourself smiling around other people only to completely fall apart once you were alone?
I did, yes. It was really hard for me to like leave. Excuse me. It was really hard for me to leave the room, and so anytime I had to have like face-to-face interaction, I did my best to like put your face on, I had gone to my dad's. I think between my house and his house were the only places that I felt semi-normal, and I had gone to his house, and I could tell he noticed I was also kind of in a dark space, and so he had asked me, like, are you okay? And I just broke down, but I was smiling like wow, and so he was probably like, she's crazy, but I'm like, yeah, I'm okay, and I'm like crying but also smiling, and so definitely I tried my best, but you have your moments.
It's hard. One thing I think many moms struggle to talk about is bonding. Did you ever feel connected to your baby right away, or was that connection something that took time?
I think it took time. I felt connected in the way of like, this is mine, my son, and like I'm his parent and I should be taking care of him, but not in the way of like now I look at my son and I'm like, I can't believe that I get to raise you, but in the moment I didn't feel that way. And again, it's not that I didn't love him, it was just, I think because I didn't have the space to make that connection.
Yeah. How did postpartum depression change the way you saw yourself? Not just as a mom, but as a woman.
In the moment, I felt very weak, It's like, I see people who have their first kid, or maybe they go into having their second, and they're just like glowing, and I just didn't, even in pregnancy, I was not my best self. So I think I almost kind of felt jealous in a way, like, how come I don't experience it like everybody else?
You had a rough pregnancy, from what I remember.
Yeah, and I've talked to people about it now, and so I had to get induced at 36 weeks going into 37 because my placenta had aged too quickly, and so basically my son just wasn't getting the nutrients he needed, and so if we waited until birth, or he was ready, he may not have been strong enough to make it through. And so I was talking to people kind of about what that means, and if it's something that I would have to worry about if I had a second, and a lot of it does come from stress, like it's your hormones in your body, and I didn't think about it in the moment, but I think we did have a lot of stressors at the time, which could potentially be why I had, postpartum depression, but just all like the roughness of pregnancy, I think also played a role in how it kind of all played out.
Before we continue, I just want to check in with you. How are you feeling, and do you need a break, or are you okay to keep going?
I think we're...
I know some of these questions aren't easy, and I just wanted to remind you again, if anything feels too overwhelming, we can skip it. I think this next part is probably the hardest, not because I want to ask difficult questions, but because I know someone listening may be sitting alone, having these exact same thoughts, believing they're the only one. If hearing your story helps even one mom realize I'm not crazy or I'm not alone, then I think this conversation is worth having. Was there ever a moment where you realized, I don't think I'm okay? Not physically, but mentally, what did that moment look like?
I think you get to a certain point where, or at least for me, it was like, okay, it's been really dark for a long time, and there's a couple of different terms that are used, like the baby blues, which is supposed to last like 6 weeks or so, and that's kind of when I knew that it wasn't that, because it lasted much longer. And or people use the term of like getting your pink back, which is like a reference. Have you heard it before?
I've not heard that one yet.
Okay, so basically it's in reference to flamingos. So whenever they have their kids, they turn white and then they slowly get their pink back. So that's what people reference, like use that reference for postpartum, you know, like until you get your pink back or until you feel like yourself again. And so I didn't feel like I was getting there. And I think that was like around 18 months. Like my son had already been a year old, and I just still didn't feel like me. It had gotten a little bit better, I think. I could manage on a day-to-day, but I was miserable. Like my work was downhill. I had actually been put on, what is it called? Like a performance thing, because I was just, I couldn't show up at work. And that's just not me. Like you know, I've always been the person who does like school or work really well. It just, so in those moments, like between work and not being able to manage at home, I just could tell that something needed to change.
Yeah. I imagine something else that makes postpartum depression so lonely is wondering if anyone else notices. Did you ever feel like you were silently asking for help without actually knowing how to ask?
I don't think I ever really did. For a long time, I thought that this was normal in a sense, that maybe I just wasn't as good as hiding it as everybody else, you know? And so I don't think I really asked for help. I think I was hoping that other people would notice, you know, and be able to give me the guidance even. Now, obviously that's not plausible, but I think in my head, that's kind of what I was hoping for.
Yeah. This next question, you absolutely do not have to answer if you don't want to. But I think it's important because so many mothers carry shame around it. Did postpartum depression ever make you question whether your family would somehow be better off without you?
Yes and no. Like I never really felt like suicidal or anything like that. But I had a lot of guilt of feeling like I wasn't doing things right, and so maybe just not being in the picture necessarily, you know, like maybe somebody else could do it better, type of thing. So it's never something that I actually wanted, you know, but you are in a place where every thought is just kind of dark. And so you wonder how you could potentially give like your spouse or your baby a better life in a sense.
Thank you. I know that wasn't easy to say out loud. Did you ever have thoughts that scared you, that made you think, why am I thinking this?
Probably. I mean, just not being in the picture was scary, you know, because it's like you plan for this life, you know, like our son was planned and it's very much something we wanted, but it just wasn't in the moment felt picture perfect, you know, and so those alone were scary thoughts.
Yeah. Were those thoughts something you felt safe telling anyone, or did you worry people would judge you?
I was worried that people would judge, and I was also scared of what it could mean. Like, before we had even left the hospital, my son has like a birthmark on his butt, and one of the nurses had literally said, and I'm like, not even 24 hours after birth, she was like, you should document this, like take pictures, because if like the pediatrician looks at it and thinks it's a bruise, they could get like CPS involved, you know?
Yeah.
And so that scared me half to death. Like, what do you mean my kid's gonna get taken for a birthmark, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you go into like the checkups, you get those questionnaires about like how you're feeling and stuff like that. And I felt like the odds were already stacked against me, right? Because his birthmark, and then I just didn't want to answer incorrectly, you know?
Right.
And so I definitely lied on those. I know that. I know you're not supposed to, but I just did everything to like make it look like I was at least teetering on the good end, you know? Like things were okay.
Yeah.
So.
Did you ever worry that if you told someone what was happening, they'd think you were a bad mom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I'm just a really anxious person, and so that aligned with like all the feelings of guilt. You just didn't want, I say you, but really I mean myself, but
Yeah.
I didn't want anybody to also think that I was, like, I felt like I wasn't making the right decisions, but I didn't want other people to also
Think that.
Yeah. And so I didn't like to share anything. Like, I even felt kind of like I didn't want to talk about breastfeeding or any of my decisions because I didn't want input on it to feel even guiltier that I made the wrong one.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you had to pretend everything was okay because everyone expected you to be happy after having a baby?
Yeah, during events mostly, like, I remember I had gone to, I think it was like one of the nieces or nephews' birthday parties, and I think Naya was maybe like 3 months old, maybe 4, and I still wasn't leaving our room and stuff, but my husband was like, we need to go, you know, like it's time. And so we had gone, and I sat on the couch the whole time, and I was inside, and I was trying to say, like, in my head, I felt like maybe people were thinking it'd be because he's newborn and he needs to be inside, you know, and stuff like that. But like in those moments, I would try my best to like have conversations, but I'd also try my best to like go in a private room or things like that. And so, to answer your question, yeah.
I hate that so many women feel like they have to suffer quietly because they're afraid of what people might think. Something I've thought about while preparing for today's conversation is how often we ask new moms, how's the baby? And honestly, I don't know that I've ever heard someone ask, how are you? Looking back now, were there signs that you wish people had noticed?
I think people did notice, you know, I think that people could recognize that I wasn't myself, but we don't know how to address it. You know, it's like, do we kind of let them be because they are a new mom and they're tired and maybe this is just, you know, normal?
Yeah.
So I don't blame anybody for not, and I did actually, I mean, I had a village. I have you guys, and I had a cousin who would like reach out all the time. And in the moment, I didn't really realize, but it was so helpful. Like she lives in another state, and she would text me and say like, oh, how are you doing? Or not necessarily give advice, but she talked about like what do they call it? The leaps, or basically when you go through like regressions and stuff like that. And there's like an app for it or something, or she had recommended getting into like Facebook groups and stuff like that, which I did, and that was really helpful. And so it's just something that like I take with me now, that I definitely try to do whenever like there's a new mom, especially first-time moms. Like I really try to make it a priority to reach out and just say like, just talk, you know. I think that it didn't necessarily need to be like, how are you? But it just needed to be something outside of the baby, you know, like a normal conversation. So, yeah.
Is there something you wish someone would have asked you that maybe would have opened the door for you to be honest?
I don't know. It's really hard to say because like, I think that the opportunities were there, you know, like my mother-in-law was there, and she did try to like take my son from me, or not in a bad way, but like help.
To help, yeah.
And like my cousin did reach out and stuff like that, and I don't know, I think I was just going through the motions that I wasn't fully aware of what I was going through myself.
Right.
So I don't know.
If someone listening has a daughter, a sister, a wife, or a best friend who's just had a baby, what are some signs that they shouldn't ignore?
Probably self-isolation. I think that was the biggest thing for me. I found comfort in like the dark, you know, like being in my room and nowhere else. And so I would say that's probably the biggest, is, you know, someone who's normally out and about, just not being.
Yeah. Were there things people said that they probably meant with good intentions but actually hurt you?
I think probably as like a first-time mom, everybody has their opinion, you know, and so just opinions was not. And again, that's for everybody, but I do remember telling somebody that I thought that I was depressed, and they were like, "No, I don't think you are," you know? Yeah. And so that really, in that moment, I was like, okay, so this is supposed to be normal, you know? And so had that conversation gone differently, I think maybe I could have made changes sooner, but just by that, it was enough for me to be like, okay, I'm supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be going through these motions, you know?
Supposed to be sad.
Yeah, yeah.
On the flip side, what was something someone did or said that made you feel seen?
In that moment, I think it was the little things, like kind of like the shakes that my mother-in-law was bringing, or my husband noticing and getting the fridge, or he would do little things like I had this obsession with ice cream and just chocolate when I was pregnant with my son, and so he would kind of bring things like that home from work. So in the moment, it was just like noticing me, you know, things that like I couldn't be there for myself, and pushing me to be there for myself really did help.
Can I ask something a little personal? One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is because I love you, and learning about postpartum depression has made me wonder if there were moments where our family could have shown up better. Looking back now, is there anything that you wish we had done differently? Not out of blame, but so that we can learn, so that if another mom in our family or one of our friends goes through this, we know how to love them better.
I don't know. Like I don't look back and think that anybody didn't help, you know, but I do think that turning into a mom changes you, you know, and so before I had Naya, like we did girls' nights all the time, you know, and that's not so frequent anymore. Or I think just trying to keep routine, not necessarily routine, but like, you know, those moments with everybody. And it's not easy. Like, I know that, I'm sure that you guys probably asked me to go and I just didn't show up, you know, things like that. And so, and I don't even know that I would have like taken the help, you know? Yeah. So I can't tell you that like anybody did anything wrong or we could have done something different. But when I will say that when I was ready, like around 18 months, my son was 18 months, I knew that it was time to start feeling like myself again. And so I had started running some, and I had asked our sister-in-law, Sarah, if she would do like a race with me, and she agreed. And so we started like working out more and just getting closer, and she had kind of became like my like shoulder. She was just a safe space, you know? Yeah. I think she was also a mom, and so she could just relate on a lot of ways. And so so no, maybe not like doing something differently, but when they're ready, like when they're coming, yeah. So I really appreciated like that she would go to the gym with me and stuff like that. And so she kind of noticed, I think, too. And so just being that open space when I was ready to make the changes, you know.
Yeah. I really appreciate your honesty, And I hope our family listens to that too. Because sometimes loving someone isn't enough. Sometimes we have to know how to love them in a way they need. Can you remember the moment when you realized, I can't keep carrying this by myself?
I probably was towards the end of like my breastfeeding journey, because I just still hadn't like shaken the feeling, you know. And my son was already 1, and I was like, I just need to get out of this, you know, like at what point does it change? And so, no, I was never actually diagnosed with postpartum depression, so you know, I can't tell you that like medication would have helped or things like that, but it was just to a point that like I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you know. And so but people were telling me that I needed to stop breastfeeding and stuff like that, and I agree. He was already past 1, but in that moment I was like, okay, he's getting to a point where he's going to be more independent, right? And so he doesn't really need me to, you know, be his hip every second. And so that's when I realized, like, okay, I need to make a change, because at a certain point, I think him relying on me so much kept me going, you know? And the realization that he wasn't going to rely on me so often, and he was going to be more of a daddy's boy eventually and things like that, made me realize, okay, like, you got to do something, or you're going to be stuck in this thing by yourself forever. So.
What was the hardest part about asking for help?
I don't think I really ever did ask for help, so maybe asking for help is the hardest part, you know? Yeah, I'm not really sure.
What did healing actually look like, and was it immediate, or was it a lot of small victories?
Definitely a lot of small victories. I think that when I was breastfeeding, I also had like, I don't know the term, but it's like breast, when they latch, it like releases a hormone that could kind of make you sad. I don't remember what it's called, but but I did notice, like, when I would breastfeed, I would have like, I didn't want to eat. It just made things harder, and my son was exclusively breastfeeding. And so at the point that he started eating food, it got a little bit better, and that's kind of when it started. You know, I gradually got there. Then I stopped breastfeeding him completely, and I could notice I was getting myself back a little bit more, and then I started working out and like getting into a different headspace. You know, it took getting into a different headspace, and that didn't happen overnight. It was an overtime thing.
Do you think healing is something that's finished, or do you think it's something you continue choosing every day?
I think you continue choosing. Like I'll still even have days that, you know, like I can kind of feel myself slipping, and I don't think I've even fully healed. I have this conversation with my husband all the time that, like, it's definitely changed me. You know, like there's things that I'm not as interested in anymore, or things that like are harder to do on a day-to-day basis. And so exercising has actually really helped me. Like, I think it kind of puts you in a different headspace, you know? So if I start to feel those way, I'll also go on a run or things like that. But it's definitely something that you have to choose to kind of be in a better space, and it may not be the same for everybody, right? But for me, it's something that I have to continue to.
I think sometimes we imagine healing means never having another hard day. But maybe healing is learning that hard days don't define you anymore. One thing I've realized while learning more about postpartum depression is that there are so many misconceptions. People hear the words, but they don't always understand what they actually mean. If someone has ever experienced postpartum depression, what's the biggest misconception you wish people would stop believing?
I think it goes for depression in general, but I think a lot of people, even me, like before having postpartum depression, was that it's like a headspace, you know? Well, and I agree in a sense that like it's something that you kind of have to help yourself out of, but it's not always a choice, you know? Like, it's really dark, and you don't always, like, you get to a point where it's just dark, you know, and it's not from the beginning that it's that way. And so I just wish people understood that it takes time and it's not a choice, you know, like some people think that you're choosing to be depressed because you don't want to do anything about it, but you're in such a place that you don't have the capacity to even manage, you know.
Yeah. Do you think people sometimes confuse postpartum depression with simply being tired or overwhelmed?
I think so. Or it was definitely for me at first. I thought that maybe, you know, this was normal, right? Like I was just overtired, and I probably was, or I definitely was, but there just does come a certain point that it's not that anymore. And I also think for people on the outside looking in, you know, that it's hard for them to recognize the signs too, because is it just tiredness? You know, like you don't want to judge a mom for being tired, but you also don't necessarily want to give them too much space that yeah. So from both sides, I think so.
Did you ever hear someone say something that made you think they just don't understand?
Yeah, I mean, like the comment that like I wasn't depressed, you know. Yeah. So like, and I think part of it is maybe people who haven't gone through it, because I know that before this, I did not understand depression. Like, I know what it is, and I have grace and sympathy and, you know, all the things for it, but I didn't realize like how heavy it feels, you know, like it's really hard to explain, but to answer your question, it's just that like I think you don't understand until you understand, you know? Yeah. And so just, I don't even know how to like give tips and tricks for like people looking out or on the outside looking in, but just that it's heavy. And
if you could erase one stereotype about postpartum depression forever, what would it be?
I don't know. Probably that like it's a choice, you know. I think like you hear stories about like mothers like doing really dark things, you know, to themselves or to their children, and I wish that those people could ask for help, you know, but it's really hard to ask for help. And so while they don't deserve it, I think people would judge them really heavily, you know. And sometimes, before I had my son, I would probably have done the same, you know. You don't really realize until after the fact, but now I read those stories and I'm like, well, maybe she had postpartum depression, or, you know. And so just thinking that those people are evil, because I think that you have no idea what they're going through behind. And also, you don't even know if they have the support, you know, like I had support and I still had really dark days. And so someone who's just like a single mom going through it, or, you know, someone just that lacks it could have just been much harder for them. So, yeah.
One thing I hear often is people saying, but you have a beautiful, healthy baby. You should be happy. Did hearing comments like that ever make you feel guilty for struggling?
Definitely. But I think that because I didn't really open up much about it until after the fact, I didn't get much of those comments, you know. So, but someone who is willing to open up, I think those would really impact them, because you already feel so guilty in the moment, and I think it would probably have put me back in a hole, you know. Like, okay, fine.
I think that's something people really needed to hear. You can deeply love your baby and still struggle. Those two things can exist at the same time. I also want to talk about something that I think affects almost every new mom now: social media. Everywhere you look, there are beautiful edited videos, perfect nurseries, perfect routines, perfect bodies, perfect smiles. Did social media ever affect the way you viewed yourself after becoming a mom?
Definitely. I think kind of on both ends of the spectrum. On one side, kind of like you said, you know, there's these beautiful photos and things like that. And I also had those, you know, I took the pictures and it made it seem like everything was butterflies and rainbows, but also it was helpful. Like I did join like the Facebook groups of people in surprise, and I did like the co-sleeping ones or the breastfeeding ones to kind of just understand. And so I think that if you are looking for a community, there is one there on social media, but also if you're looking for it to be picture perfect, and you can do that too. So it's just being mindful that not everything is as you see, and then finding places in between.
I think one of the biggest things I've taken away from today's conversation is just how invisible postpartum depression can be. So many people look at a new mom and see a smile, a beautiful baby, a family that's adjusting to a new chapter. But what we've learned today is that there can be so much happening beneath the surface that no one else sees. Destiny, thank you for trusting us with the beginning of your story. I know revisiting these memories isn't easy, and I know there are so many mothers listening who already feel a little less alone because of your honesty. In the next part of our conversation, we're going to hear from another perspective. We're going to be joined by Tolly as she shares what it was like watching the woman he loves walk through postpartum depression, how it impacted their marriage, what support looked like, and what he wishes every partner knew. Because postpartum depression doesn't just affect one person, it affects the whole family. Thank you so much for listening today. Take care of yourselves. Check in on the mothers in your life. And we'll see you next week for part 2 of this conversation. Talk to you guys next week.